My name is Sharon, and my parents cut me from Thanksgiving. Mom said, "Your sister wants her boyfriend to make a good first impression. She thinks having you there would make her look bad." I hung up. The next day, they appeared at my door furious, and her boyfriend said, the phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office. Mom's voice carried that apologetic tone I'd learned to recognize over the years, the one she used when delivering news she knew would hurt. "Honey, about Thanksgiving this year," she began, and I already felt my stomach tighten. "Your sister really wants this dinner to go perfectly. Travis is coming, and it's the first time she's bringing someone home in 3 years." I set down my pen, waiting for whatever came next. "Brooke thinks having you there would make her look bad. She's worried about how Travis will perceive the family dynamic, and she asked if we could keep it small this year. Just the four of us." The words landed like stones, my own mother telling me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving because my presence would embarrass my younger sister. I thought about all the family dinners I'd attended, all the times I'd bitten my tongue when Brooke made snide comments about my career choices or living situation. The memory of last Christmas surfaced when she loudly announced to everyone that I was still single at 32, as if my relationship status was a family crisis. "You're uninviting me," I said flatly. "It's just one holiday, sweetheart. Brooke really likes this man, and we want to support her. You understand, don't you?" I hung up without another word. My apartment felt suffocatingly quiet after that call. I stood by the window watching the November rain streak down the glass, trying to process what had just happened. My own family had chosen my sister's comfort over my inclusion. The hurt morphed into something sharper as the evening wore on. By morning, I'd made several decisions. I opened my laptop and began typing emails. The first went to my Aunt Lorraine, Dad's sister, who lived 2 hours north and had been asking me to visit for months. The second went to my colleague, Jessica, confirming our standing offer to volunteer at the community kitchen on Thanksgiving. The third was to my financial advisor requesting a meeting to discuss some investments I'd been contemplating. 24 hours after Mom's call, someone pounded on my door with enough force to rattle the frame. I checked the peephole and saw both my parents standing in the hallway, my father's face flushed with anger. I opened the door halfway. "What's going on?" Dad pushed past me into the apartment, Mom trailing behind with tears already streaming down her face. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded. "You need to be more specific." I crossed my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Don't play games with us," Dad snapped. "Travis called off Thanksgiving. He told Brooke he wouldn't be coming to our house under any circumstances. She's devastated." Mom collapsed onto my sofa, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "He said terrible things about our family, about how we treat you. Brooke is upstairs crying and she won't talk to anyone." I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest, though I kept my expression neutral. "I still don't understand what this has to do with me." "Travis said you reached out to him," Dad continued, his voice rising. "He said you told him things about our family that made him reconsider his relationship with Brooke entirely. What did you say to him?" The truth was simpler than they'd imagined. I hadn't reached out to Travis directly. I'd simply updated my social media profiles, making them public for the first time in years. I'd posted about my work as a senior financial analyst, the volunteer programs I coordinated, my recent promotion. I'd shared photos from my hiking trips, my pottery classes, the fundraiser I organized for the Children's Hospital. I'd tagged family photos from years past, including several where Brooke's contempt for me was barely concealed. Travis had found my profiles on his own. He'd seen the woman my family regularly diminish, the daughter and sister they found disposable enough to exclude from holidays. He'd apparently done what any decent person would do. He'd questioned the character of people who treated their own family member that way. "I didn't tell Travis anything," I said calmly. "I didn't send him messages or call him. I made some changes to my social media settings, that's all." "You knew he would see," Mom accused, her voice cracking. "You did this on purpose to ruin Brooke's relationship." I updated my profiles to reflect my actual life. If seeing the truth about who I am and how I'm treated damaged Brooke's relationship, maybe you should ask yourselves why that happened. Dad's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You're being vindictive and petty. This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes family events difficult." Difficult for whom? The question came out sharper than I'd intended, because from where I'm standing, I've spent years making myself smaller to accommodate Brooke's insecurities. I've ignored her insults, her constant criticism, her need to diminish my accomplishments. And when she decided I was too embarrassing to include in Thanksgiving, you both went along with it without question. "She's going through a hard time," Mom protested weakly. "Her last relationship ended badly, and she's finally found someone who makes her happy. So I'm supposed to disappear to preserve her happiness. I'm supposed to accept being erased from family gatherings because my existence is inconvenient. The silence that followed felt heavy. Dad's anger had shifted into something that looked almost like shame, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom continued crying quietly, her tissue shredded in her hands. What did Travis actually say? I asked. When he called things off with Brooke. Mom's voice came out in a whisper. He said he couldn't be with someone who treated their family the way Brooke treats you. He said the way we all enable her behavior showed a lack of character he couldn't overlook. He told her that any woman who demands her sister be excluded from Thanksgiving because she's embarrassed by her isn't someone he could build a future with. He said you seemed like a remarkable person from what he could see online, Dad added reluctantly. He couldn't understand why we'd exclude you, and when Brooke tried to explain everything she said apparently made things worse. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to glow in the early evening darkness. A part of me felt guilty for the pain this had caused, but a larger part felt vindicated. Someone had finally seen through the narrative my family had constructed about me. Travis sounds like a good man, I said quietly. Someone with actual values and integrity. Brooke probably lost something valuable. You need to fix this, Dad demanded, though his voice had lost its earlier force. Call Travis. Tell him there was a misunderstanding. Explain that you were hurt and acted rashly. I turned to face them. No. Excuse me, Mom's eyes widened. I said no. I'm not going to lie to save Brooke from the consequences of her own actions. I'm not going to pretend that being excluded from Thanksgiving was a misunderstanding. It happened exactly the way it happened, and Travis deserves to know the truth about the woman he was dating and the family he might have married into. She's your sister, Mom said desperately. Family is supposed to forgive and move past things. Family is also supposed to include each other in Thanksgiving dinner, but that didn't seem to matter yesterday. Dad's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it before cursing under his breath. Brooke wants to know if we've convinced you to fix things yet. She's talking about filing a harassment complaint against you. For what? Making my social media public posting about my actual life. I laughed without humor. Tell her to go ahead. I'd be fascinated to hear her explain to the police that she's being harassed by her sister's truthful Instagram posts. Mom stood up abruptly. When did you become so cruel? This isn't the daughter I raised. The daughter you raised learned to accept scraps of affection and constant criticism as normal. The daughter you raised made herself small and quiet to keep the peace. That daughter got disinvited from Thanksgiving for existing, and something in her finally broke. They left shortly after, Dad muttering threats about family consequences and Mom sobbing about her broken family. I locked the door behind them and returned to the window, feeling simultaneously liberated and exhausted. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Travis. I got your number from mutual friends. I want you to know that what happened isn't your fault. Your sister showed me exactly who she is, and I'm grateful I saw it before things went further. I hope you have a good Thanksgiving wherever you spend it. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a response. Thank you for seeing the truth. I hope you find someone who deserves your integrity. The following days brought a barrage of messages from various family members. Brooke sent paragraphs of vitriol calling me every name she could think of, accusing me of jealousy and sabotage. Dad's messages were curt demands that I apologize and make things right. Mom's texts alternated between guilt trips and desperate pleas for family unity. I blocked Brooke after the 5th message. The others I left unread. Thanksgiving arrived cold and bright. I drove to Aunt Lorraine's house, where she prepared enough food for a small army, despite it being just the 3 of us, her, me, and her longtime partner, Margaret. We spent the afternoon cooking together, and she never once asked about the drama with my parents. She seemed to already know, perhaps having talked to Dad, and had decided her loyalty lay with me. Your father called me, she admitted over dessert. He wanted me to convince you to apologize to Brooke. I nearly choked on my pumpkin pie. You said that to him. I've watched how they treat you for years, Lorraine said matter-of-factly. I've bitten my tongue because it wasn't my place to interfere. But when he called asking me to pressure you into taking responsibility for Brooke's failed relationship, that's where I draw the line. You did nothing wrong, and I told him so. Margaret nodded in agreement. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect and consideration. What they did to you was unconscionable. The weekend after Thanksgiving, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you for the warning." Inside, a woman named Rachel explained that she'd gone on 2 dates with Travis in the weeks following his breakup with Brooke. He'd been honest about why his previous relationship ended, and Rachel had looked up my family out of curiosity. She'd found my public profiles, and after reading through everything, had reached out to thank me for being honest about my experiences. Your posts about family dynamics and self-worth helped me recognize some patterns in my own family, she wrote. I've been the scapegoat for my siblings for years, and seeing someone else refuse to accept that treatment gave me courage to set boundaries with my own parents. I'm spending Christmas with friends this year, instead of subjecting myself to another holiday of criticism and exclusion. Thank you for sharing your story. More messages trickled in over the following weeks. Apparently, my story had resonated beyond Travis. People who knew my family, distant relatives, friends of friends, they'd all seen the public posts and drawn their own conclusions. Several mentioned that they'd always wondered about the family dynamics, having noticed how differently my parents treated Brooke and me at various gatherings over the years. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, Amanda sent me a Facebook message detailing her own observations from family reunions. I always noticed how your mom would light up when Brooke entered the room, but barely acknowledged when you arrived, she wrote. I asked my mom about it once, and she just said some siblings have closer relationships with parents than others, but it always seemed like more than that to me. The validation from outside sources felt both vindicating and heartbreaking. These people had witnessed my erasure and said nothing, perhaps assuming it wasn't their place to intervene. I couldn't blame them entirely. Family politics are complicated, and outsiders rarely understand the full picture. Still, knowing that others had seen what I'd experienced for years made me feel less crazy, less alone in my perceptions. Work became my sanctuary during those weeks. My boss, Catherine, pulled me aside one afternoon and mentioned she'd noticed a change in my demeanor. You seem lighter somehow, she observed, more confident. Whatever you're going through, it seems to be clarifying something for you. She wasn't wrong. Cutting ties with my family's dysfunction had freed up mental and emotional energy I hadn't realized I'd been expending. For years, I'd been performing an exhausting balancing act, trying to be invisible enough not to threaten Brooke, present enough not to be forgotten, entirely accomplished enough to earn my parents' pride, but not so successful that I'd overshadow my sister. The constant calibration had been draining in ways I'd never fully acknowledged. Without that weight, I found myself taking risks I'd previously avoided. I pitched a new initiative at work that I'd been sitting on for months, afraid that drawing too much positive attention to myself would somehow backfire. Catherine loved the idea and gave me a team to develop it. I signed up for a painting class I'd been eyeing, joined a book club, started saying yes to social invitations I would have previously declined. Jessica noticed the shift too. Over coffee one Saturday morning, she studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You're different, she finally said. It's like you've been holding your breath for years and you're finally exhaling. Maybe I have been, I admitted. I spent so long trying to be whatever version of myself would be acceptable to my family that I forgot what I actually wanted to be. And what do you want to be? I considered the question seriously. Myself, just completely myself without apology or explanation. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Jessica's question lingered in my mind for days afterward. Who was I when I wasn't performing for my family's approval? The answer emerged slowly through small discoveries and quiet revelations. I liked waking up early and watching the sunrise with strong coffee. I preferred documentaries to romantic comedies. I was happiest when working on complex problems that required hours of focused concentration. I enjoyed solitude more than I'd admitted, finding peace in my own company that I'd never experienced in family gatherings. I had opinions on politics, art, and social issues that I'd kept muted for fear of causing conflict. The person emerging from years of suppression was sharper, more opinionated, more comfortable taking up space than the version of myself I'd presented to my family. This version didn't apologize for her intelligence or downplay her accomplishments. She didn't smooth over awkward moments or laugh at jokes that weren't funny to keep the peace. Meanwhile, Brooke's social media presence became increasingly erratic. She posted cryptic quotes about betrayal and loyalty, shared articles about toxic family members, and made vague references to people who pretended to be victims when they were actually manipulators. Her friends responded with supportive comments, completely unaware that she was describing me in these posts. I watched this unfold with a strange detachment. The old version of myself would have been devastated by her public characterizations, would have rushed to defend myself or set the record straight. This new version simply observed, recognizing the posts for what they were: desperate attempts to control a narrative that was slipping from her grasp. One of Brooke's friends, someone I'd met a few times at family events, sent me a private message asking for my side of the story. Apparently, Brooke had told her inner circle that I'd deliberately sabotaged her relationship with Travis out of jealousy, and some of her friends were starting to question the narrative. I've met you enough times to know you don't seem like the vindictive person Brooke is describing, the message read. And when I looked at your public profiles, everything seemed really normal and positive. I'm confused about what actually happened. I debated whether to respond, ultimately deciding that silence served me better than engaging in Brooke's drama. If her friends were curious enough, they could draw their own conclusions from publicly available information. I wasn't interested in defending myself against accusations I knew to be false. December brought unexpected complications when my company's annual holiday party fell on the same night as a family friend's wedding that my parents expected everyone to attend. I'd already committed to the work party weeks earlier, and my attendance was especially important given my recent promotion and the new project I was leading. Mom called 3 times before I finally answered. "The Hendersons have been family friends for 20 years, she said, her voice tight with frustration. "They specifically asked if all of us would be there. How will it look if you're the only one who doesn't show up?" "It will look like I had a prior work commitment," I replied calmly. "I told you about the company party a month ago. Can't you skip it just this once? Your sister is going to be there with Keith, and it would mean a lot to everyone if we could present a united family front." The phrase united family front struck me as darkly funny given recent events. I'm not skipping an important work function to maintain appearances at a wedding for people I haven't seen in 5 years. Those people have watched you grow up. They're like extended family. Then they'll understand that I have professional obligations. I kept my tone even, refusing to be drawn into an argument. Mom tried guilt then, bargaining, offering to talk to the Hendersons about me arriving late. I held firm, and eventually she hung up with a disappointed sigh that felt designed to make me reconsider. The work party turned out to be one of the best nights I'd had in months. Catherine publicly acknowledged my contributions to the company, and several executives I'd never spoken to personally approached me to discuss my new initiative. I worked, laughed, danced, and stayed out far later than I'd planned. The next morning, I woke to 17 text messages in the family group chat. Apparently, the Hendersons had asked about my absence at the wedding, and Brooke had told them I'd skipped because I was going through some personal issues and needed space from the family. Mom had evidently corroborated this story, and now various family friends were sending concerned messages asking if I was okay. I screenshotted the entire conversation and sent it to Aunt Lorraine with a single word: "Unbelievable." Her response came within minutes. "They're rewriting reality to protect Brooke's image. Classic behavior. Want me to set the record straight." I told her not to bother. Let them construct whatever narrative they needed. I knew the truth, and increasingly that was enough for me. The professional success I'd been experiencing accelerated in ways I hadn't anticipated. The initiative I'd proposed gained traction quickly, and by mid-December I was being asked to present it to the board of directors. Catherine pulled me aside before the presentation with advice that felt like it extended beyond professional guidance. "You found your voice these past few months," she said. "Whatever was holding you back before you've worked through it, don't lose that clarity. Don't let anyone convince you to make yourself smaller again." The presentation went exceptionally well. The board approved the initiative with enthusiastic support, and I was given expanded authority over its implementation. Walking out of that boardroom, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's validation. I'd earned this through my own merit, my own hard work, my own vision. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at an expensive restaurant I'd been wanting to try. Sitting alone at a table by the window, I watched the city lights twinkle against the winter darkness and felt genuinely content for the first time in longer than I could remember. My phone buzzed with congratulatory texts from colleagues, but nothing from my family. They didn't know about my success because I hadn't told them, and their absence from this moment didn't hurt the way it might have months earlier. A week before Christmas, Dad called from a number I didn't recognize. I'd been screening calls from their usual phones. "We need to talk about what's happening with this family," he said without preamble. "I'm listening." "Your mother is distraught about how divided we've become. Brooke is angry and hurt. We can't keep going like this." "I agree," I said simply. "Then you'll come to Christmas dinner. We can work through this together as a family should." "I'll come on one condition. We attend family therapy. All of us, including Brooke. Not just one session, a commitment to actually working through these issues with a professional." Dad's silence stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Therapy." He finally repeated his tone, suggesting I'd propose something ridiculous. "Yes. If we're going to fix anything, we need help from someone trained to navigate family dynamics. Someone objective who can help us communicate honestly. We can work this out on our own. We don't need to air our private business to a stranger." "Then I won't be coming to Christmas dinner," I said, keeping my voice steady and matter of fact. "I'm not interested in another holiday where we pretend everything is fine while nothing actually changes." More silence. I could practically hear him struggling with the decision, weighing his desire for a unified family Christmas against his resistance to outside intervention. "I'll discuss it with your mother and Brooke," he finally conceded. 3 days later, Mom sent an email confirming they'd all agreed to therapy. The first session was scheduled for the second week of January. I agreed to attend Christmas dinner on the condition that we wouldn't discuss any of the ongoing issues. The holiday would be neutral territory, a temporary ceasefire rather than a resolution. Christmas Day arrived with fresh snow and temperatures cold enough to see your breath. I showed up at my parents' house with the same expensive wine I'd brought for years, the same obligatory cheerfulness I'd always performed. But underneath, something fundamental had shifted. I was there by choice, with clear boundaries, prepared to leave at the first sign of toxicity. Brooke greeted me with brittle courtesy, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Keith seemed pleasant enough, though clearly uncomfortable with the obvious tension. Mom had cooked enough food for twice our number, her anxiety manifesting in excessive preparation. Dad played the jovial host, but I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between weariness and grudging respect. We made it through dinner, without incident, sticking to safe topics, weather sports, neighborhood gossip. Brooke showed everyone photos from a recent trip she and Keith had taken to wine country. Dad told stories about his golf league. Mom fussed over everyone's plates, ensuring no one went without seconds. Sitting there amid the forced normalcy, I realized how much energy it took to maintain the illusion of functional family dynamics. Everyone was performing their assigned roles, speaking scripted lines, avoiding any topic that might shatter the carefully constructed facade. It was exhausting to watch, and I found myself counting down the hours until I could politely excuse myself. During dessert, Brooke's mask slipped slightly. "Must be nice to be so successful at work," she said, her tone carrying an edge that made everyone freeze. "Not all of us can just focus entirely on our careers without worrying about relationships or family obligations." "Brooke!" Mom said sharply, a warning in her voice. "What I'm just saying, she has it easier because she's alone. No partner to consider, no complicated relationship dynamics to navigate." Keith looked deeply uncomfortable, studying his pie as if it held answers to escape this moment. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's eyes pleaded with me not to take the bait. I set down my fork carefully. "You're right that my priorities are different from yours. I've chosen to invest in my career and personal growth rather than compromising myself to maintain relationships that diminish me." The words landed like stones and still water ripples of implication spreading through the room. Brooke's face flushed red, and I could see her struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't completely shatter the holiday truce. "I think we should open presents," Mom interjected desperately, already standing and moving toward the living room. We followed the tension thick enough to choke on. The gift exchange proceeded with mechanical politeness. I'd bought generic presents for everyone, nice enough to fulfill obligation, impersonal enough to require no emotional investment. They had clearly done the same for me, though Mom had included a card with a long, handwritten note about loving me and hoping we could move past recent difficulties. I left shortly after the presents were opened, claiming early work commitments the next day. Mom hugged me tightly at the door, whispering, "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy." She was right about that, at least. Driving home through the quiet Christmas evening, I felt neither regret nor satisfaction about how things had gone. I'd shown up, maintained boundaries, and refused to engage with Brooke's provocations. That felt like victory enough. My parents tried one more intervention in early December. They appeared at my office, causing enough of a scene that security got involved. Dad demanded I take down my social media posts, claiming they were damaging the family's reputation. Mom begged me to consider Brooke's mental health, saying my sister had become depressed and anxious since Travis left. "She needs therapy," I told them, calmly aware of my colleagues watching from nearby desks. "She needs to address why she treats people the way she does. What she doesn't need is for everyone around her to keep enabling her behavior and protecting her from consequences." "You're destroying this family," Dad said coldly. "No, I'm refusing to be destroyed by it. There's a difference." Security escorted them out when Dad refused to leave voluntarily. My boss, who had witnessed the entire exchange, called me into her office afterward. I'd expected a reprimand, but instead she asked if I was okay and offered me the company's employee assistance program information. "Family dynamics can be complicated," she said kindly. "But from what I've observed over the years, I've known you. You've always conducted yourself with professionalism and integrity. Whatever's happening with your family, I want you to know that your work family has your back." Christmas approached with radio silence from my parents. Brooke's social media posts painted her as a victim of cruel circumstances, though she never mentioned me by name. Her friends left sympathetic comments unaware of the full story. I considered responding, but decided against it. The truth was already out there for anyone who cared to look. I spent Christmas Eve with Jessica and her family, then volunteered at the community kitchen on Christmas Day. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, and I went home feeling more connected to humanity than I had in years. In January, Aunt Lorraine called with news. Your mother reached out to me. She wants to know if you'd be willing to do family therapy. Your dad is resistant, but she's pushing for it. What do you think I should do? That's not for me to decide, honey. But I will say this therapy only works if everyone involved is willing to be honest and make changes. If they're going into it expecting the therapist to tell you to just forgive and forget, it'll be a waste of time. I thought about it for several days before responding to Mom's email. I agreed to therapy on one condition: Brooke had to be involved, and everyone had to commit to at least 6 sessions, regardless of how uncomfortable the conversations became. To my surprise, they all agreed. The first session was brutal. The therapist, Dr. Patricia Mendoza, had reviewed the written summaries we'd each submitted beforehand. She started by asking Brooke to explain why she'd wanted me excluded from Thanksgiving. Brooke's answer was vague and defensive, full of phrases like family dynamics and complicated history. Dr. Mendoza pressed for specifics, and Brooke eventually admitted she'd been embarrassed by what Travis might think of me. Why would your sister's presence embarrass you? Dr. Mendoza asked. Brooke's face flushed. She's always been difficult. She doesn't fit in with the family. Can you give me an example of her being difficult? The silence stretched painfully long. Brooke looked to our parents for support, but Dr. Mendoza's attention remained fixed on her. Finally, Brooke muttered something about me being too serious and not fun at parties. So your sister's personality differs from yours, and you find that embarrassing. Dr. Mendoza's tone was neutral, but the implications were clear. We didn't resolve anything that first session. Mom cried, Dad remained defensive, and Brooke refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. I left feeling drained but oddly hopeful. At least the truth was being spoken aloud in a space where it couldn't be dismissed or rewritten. By the third session, cracks started appearing in the family narrative. Dr. Mendoza had asked us each to bring examples of positive family memories. Dad talked about teaching Brooke to ride a bike. Mom recalled Brooke's high school graduation. When Dr. Mendoza asked about memories involving me, there was another long silence. We have good memories with her too, Mom said weakly. Can you share one? Mom described a vacation from when I was 7 before Brooke was born. Dad mentioned my college graduation, but when Dr. Mendoza asked him to elaborate, he could only recall that it had happened. He couldn't remember details about the ceremony or the celebration afterward. Do you notice a pattern? Dr. Mendoza asked gently. That was when Mom started to cry in earnest, the kind of crying that comes from a dam finally breaking. We failed her, she whispered. We've been failing her for years, and we didn't even see it. Dad looked stricken, his earlier defensiveness crumbling. Brooke sat rigidly in her chair, arms crossed, refusing to engage with the revelation unfolding around her. Progress came slowly after that. Dad admitted he'd always felt more connected to Brooke because she shared his extroverted personality. Mom confessed that she'd unconsciously compared us and found me difficult to understand. Brooke remained resistant, insisting that everyone was overreacting and that she'd done nothing wrong. It was in the 5th session when things shifted dramatically. Dr. Mendoza asked Brooke point blank if she loved me. The question seemed to catch her completely off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then looked away. I don't know, she finally said so quietly I almost didn't hear her. You don't know if you love your sister. Dr. Mendoza's voice held no judgment, only curiosity. She's always been there, but we've never been close. She's like background noise, I guess. Someone who exists in the family but isn't really part of it. Brooke's honesty was more painful than any insult she'd ever thrown at me. And you? Dr. Mendoza turned to me. How does hearing that make you feel? Sad, I said, after considering but not surprised. I've known for a long time that I was an outsider in my own family. Hearing it said aloud just confirms what I already understood. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away gently. We can fix this, she said desperately. We can be better. Maybe, I replied. But it's going to take more than wanting to fix it. It's going to require actual change, consistent effort, and acknowledgement that years of damage can't be undone in a few therapy sessions. We continued with therapy through the spring. Progress was inconsistent and often frustrating. Brooke started attending her own individual sessions and slowly began acknowledging her role in our damaged relationship. Dad made awkward but genuine attempts to connect with me, asking about my work and interests. Mom sent regular texts, though they often felt forced and overly cheerful. By summer, we'd reached a fragile understanding. We weren't a healed family, but we were a family learning to be honest about its fractures. Brooke apologized, though the words came haltingly and with obvious difficulty. I accepted the apology, but made clear that rebuilding trust would take time. Travis's name came up occasionally, usually through mutual acquaintances. He'd started dating Rachel seriously, and by all accounts, they were happy together. Brooke claimed she was fine with it, though I suspected the truth was more complicated. She'd started dating someone new, a man named Keith, who seemed kind but unremarkable. When Thanksgiving rolled around again, the invitation came via group text rather than an individual call. Mom had written, "We would love to have everyone together this year. No pressure, no expectations, just family, if you want to be there." I thought about it for a week before responding. The truth was, I didn't know if I wanted to spend Thanksgiving with people who'd hurt me so deeply. Aunt Lorraine had already extended her own invitation, offering me an escape hatch if I needed one. In the end, I compromised. I agreed to come for dessert, giving myself the freedom to leave if things became uncomfortable. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, the atmosphere was cautiously welcoming. Brooke greeted me with a stiff hug, and we made small talk about work and weather. Dad asked thoughtful questions about my recent promotion. Mom had baked my favorite pie without being asked. It wasn't perfect. The wounds were still fresh, the trust still rebuilding. But as I sat at the familiar dining table surrounded by the complicated people who made up my family, I felt something shift inside me. I'd spent so long being invisible that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. The evening ended early, and I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic about the future. My phone buzzed with the text from Brooke. "Thank you for coming. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful you're giving me a chance to earn it." I saved the message without responding immediately. Forgiveness wasn't something I was ready to offer completely, but I was open to the possibility of it someday. For now, that felt like enough. The story could have ended there, with tentative reconciliation and a poisonous hope, but life rarely provides neat endings, and my family's journey toward healing was far from over. What mattered was that I'd stopped accepting invisibility as my default state. I demanded to be seen, to be valued, to be included, and I'd been willing to walk away entirely rather than accept less. Travis had been the catalyst, but the change had come from within. I'd finally recognized that I deserved better than the scraps of affection my family had offered for years. Whether they could learn to provide more remained to be seen. But either way, I knew I'd survive because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. I didn't need their validation to know my worth. I found it within myself, and nobody could take that away from me ever.